Well, this is the final volume in Gordon Rhea's narrative of Grant's Overland Campaign. It covers the 11 days between June 4th, that is the day after the major assault at Cold Harbor, and June 15th, shortly after the first attack on Petersburg. To my mind, there are three main phases in the story of these 11 days. The first is what went on in the immediate aftermath of the assault on Cold Harbor on June 3rd. The second phase is the move of the Army of the Potomac from Cold Harbor down and around Richmond and outside Petersburg. And the third part is what actually happened during the first attack on Petersburg. Now let's start off with what I'm calling the first phase, and that is the immediate aftermath of the June 3rd assault. Of course, several things were going on. First, of course, Grant was figuring out his next moves. And what he did was to first order Meade to materially strengthen the entrenchments facing Lee along Topopotomy Creek, effectively pinning Lee in place. Then he sent Sheridan off to assist in cutting off Lee's supply line from the Shenandoah Valley. And that move forced Lee to reduce his forces at Cold Harbor. That permanently deprived Lee of the ability to take the initiative and to launch any kind of an assault, an offensive against Grant. Now, while all this is going on, Grant was formulating the detailed plan for his next move against Lee. Now, as a side note, in this section of the story, Ray gives a very detailed presentation of the communications between Lee and Grant on the removal of the wounded from between the lines at Cold Harbor. He completely explodes the criticism Grant has gotten over the years for being somewhat cold-blooded. Now, I can't summarize Ray's description of what went on, but if you read it, it could very well change your mind about Grant. Now back to the main story. Grant's idea was this sweep around Richmond so as to draw Lee out from his position at Cold Harbor and again try to set him up for destruction. Three things had to happen to make this move work. First off, it had to be very fast in getting below the James River. That is, getting the entire Army of the Potomac below the James River. The second part would be launching the actual assault on Petersburg. And then finally, this whole maneuver had to be completely screened from Lee. Now, evidently, a lot of military historians think that the way the Army of the Potomac moved down to Petersburg was actually a masterpiece in maneuver. To me, it reminded me of Grant's maneuver when he captured Vicksburg. I think credit has to go beyond Grant and be spread around to generals like Humphreys and the other staff officers in the Army of the Potomac. They had to figure out how to move something as big and complicated as that army and do it in such a way as to implement Grant's strategic vision. And they did, I would say, a fairly good job of it. Now, again, back to the main story. The final phase of Grant's plan was Baldy Smith's attack on Petersburg. And that turned out to be really, really unfortunate. The fact is that the Federals came within an ace of capturing Petersburg and cutting Lee off from all of his supplies. But it failed. It failed because of the usual lack of coordination among the different elements in the Army of the Potomac. The blame for this, however, rests squarely with Grant. He only told one general what his total concept was, and that was General Butler. Of course, Butler was arguably the worst of his generals, and he was actually really in no position to assist in Smith's attack. Meade, Hancock, and Smith were never informed by Grant as to what the whole idea was. And then Grant exacerbated this problem by not designating someone to coordinate the movements of these elements right on the field. Or if not designating somebody, by doing it himself. And all this, I think, goes back to the screwed up relationship between Grant and Meade. Gordon Rhea is without a doubt a Grant fanboy, but he severely criticizes Grant in at least two major respects. The first is that Rhea argues that Grant didn't need to attack Petersburg after all, that he could have simply tried to assault the railroad link connecting Petersburg and Richmond. Maybe so. I'm certainly in no position to judge. His other criticism of Grant is unquestionably true, and that is Grant's failure to communicate his plans to Meade, Hancock, and Smith, the guys who had to carry it out. That failure to communicate led directly to the failure of the attack and, of course, to the 7-month siege that would follow this whole operation. Now, as far as Lee goes, Rhea rightly praises him for his ability to effectively block Grant with his very, very much smaller army. So this was a great book. I thoroughly recommend it. It puts you right there, right in the action. And I can't close with a little footnote about Shelby Foote. Gordon Rhea calls his 3-volume history a historical novel. I haven't read those 3 volumes in quite some time, but I know that when I did, I thoroughly enjoyed them. And I really liked watching them on the Ken Burns show. But Gordon Rhea got me thinking. And, you might give this book a try and make up your own mind as to Shelby Foote and Gordon Rhea and Grant, and Lee. It's great. Give the book a try. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, press the like button, press the subscribe button, and once again, thank you for your viewership.